He won't stop thinking about you. Not because you chase him, not because you explain yourself, and certainly not because you stay available at all costs. He can't stop thinking about you because something inside him has been quietly displaced. And displacement is far more powerful than persuasion. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders soften. Because what I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with tricks, strategies, or performance. It has everything to do with presence. Most women were taught that connection is built through effort. More messages, more patience, more emotional labor. But there is a moment, subtle, almost invisible, when effort stops creating closeness and starts destroying desire. And that moment arrives when a woman explains herself too much. As Carl Jung said, what you resist persists, but what you withdraw energy from begins to transform. A man's emotional focus is not captured by pursuit. It is captured by absence that carries meaning. When you stop filling the silence, when you stop clarifying what should be obvious, when you stop rescuing the connection from discomfort, something primal awakens in him. Not anxiety, awareness. You see, the masculine psyche does not attach to what is constantly available. It attaches to what feels self-contained. A woman who no longer chases becomes an unanswered question, and the unconscious mind hates unanswered questions. In Jungian terms, you stop feeding his conscious expectations, and you activate his shadow, the part of him that wonders, the part that replays moments, the part that asks, "Why do I feel her absence so strongly?" This is not manipulation. This is psychological gravity. When your energy stops leaking outward, it turns inward. It condenses. It gains weight. And suddenly, your silence speaks louder than your explanations ever did. He starts noticing details he ignored. Your tone, your timing, your restraint, your calm. Because a woman who does not chase does something radical. She forces a man to meet himself in the space she no longer fills. And that is where obsession is born, not in words, but in echo. If this resonates somewhere deep in your chest, you're already shifting. Stay with me. Subscribe to the channel, because this journey has only begun, and what awakens next will change how you are felt forever. When you stop texting, something very specific happens inside him, and it has nothing to do with games. It has to do with interruption. His nervous system was used to a rhythm. Your availability, your responsiveness, your emotional availability smoothing the edges of his uncertainty. And when that rhythm disappears, the mind rushes in to restore it. But here is the paradox most women never see. The more you tried to hold the connection together, the less space he had to feel it. As Carl Jung observed, the unconscious is not influenced by good intentions. It responds to imbalance, to tension, to what is unresolved. When you remove yourself, calmly, without explanation, his psyche is forced to do the work you used to do for him. He starts replaying conversations. Not the dramatic ones, the quiet ones. Your pauses, your restraint, the moment you didn't respond the way you used to. And this is crucial. His thoughts are not driven by fear of losing you. They're driven by the loss of access. Access to your emotional labor. Access to your reassurance. Access to the certainty that you were always there to stabilize the connection. When that access disappears, desire reemerges. Jung would call this a confrontation with the anima, the feminine presence inside a man that awakens when a woman becomes internally whole. Not needy, not chasing, not explaining. Whole. And wholeness is magnetic because it cannot be consumed. This is why silence works when words fail. Words belong to the conscious mind, but silence speaks directly to the unconscious. He begins to sense that something has shifted, that you are no longer orienting your energy toward him, that you are no longer waiting. And waiting, for the masculine psyche, is comfort. But movement, quiet, self-directed movement, is threat. Not a threat of punishment, a threat of irrelevance. So his attention turns inward and toward you at the same time. He wonders what you're doing, not because he needs to know, but because not knowing unsettles him. You have not disappeared. You have become opaque. And opacity is irresistible. Because when a woman no longer explains herself, a man must either rise in awareness or live with the discomfort of not reaching her. And that discomfort is what keeps you on his mind, not as noise, as gravity. What truly hijacks his emotional focus is not your absence. It's what your absence reveals. When you stop explaining, you remove the narrative he relied on to stay comfortable. You no longer soften the truth for him. You no longer translate your needs into language he can postpone. And this is where the internal shift begins. A man does not obsess over a woman because she gives him clarity. He obsesses because she removes illusion. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Your silence forces him to confront something he avoided. His role. Before, he could float, delay, respond halfway, because you were there to bridge the gap. Now the gap remains, and the masculine psyche cannot ignore a gap it did not choose. He begins to feel exposed, not accused, not pressured, exposed. Because without your emotional explanations, his behavior speaks for itself. This is where most women panic and break the spell. They rush back in with reassurance, with logic, with understanding. But the power lives in restraint. Not coldness, not punishment. Restraint. Restraint tells his unconscious. She is not fighting to be chosen. She is not afraid of distance. She trusts herself enough to let reality unfold. And reality is terrifying when it cannot be negotiated. He starts to feel something unfamiliar. Not guilt, but responsibility. Because now, if he wants closeness, he must move. Not emotionally theorize. Not send breadcrumbs. Move. Jung would describe this as the collapse of projection. When a man can no longer project comfort onto a woman who stabilizes him, he must confront his own emotional maturity. And here is the part few talk about. Your silence doesn't make him chase. It makes him reflect. Chasing is instinctual. Reflection is transformative. He asks himself questions he avoided. Why does her absence feel heavier than her presence used to? Why am I thinking about her now, when she's no longer reaching? Because you stopped managing his emotions. And the moment a woman stops carrying what does not belong to her, a man finally feels the weight of what he was avoiding. That weight keeps you in his mind. Not romantically, existentially. And once a woman becomes a mirror instead of a cushion, she is never forgotten. There is a moment, quiet, internal, when he realizes he can no longer access you the way he used to. Not because you blocked him, not because you demanded more, but because you stepped back into yourself. And this is where his emotional focus locks in. A man's attention is not held by pursuit alone. It is held by contrast. Before, you were emotionally available even when he was inconsistent. Now, you are consistent even when he is uncertain. That reversal destabilizes him. As Carl Jung wrote, where love rules, there is no will to power. But when love is unbalanced, power unconsciously shifts. You are no longer offering yourself to be chosen. You are choosing where your energy goes. And suddenly, he feels something that has nothing to do with romance. Loss of control. Not control over you. Control over the dynamic. He doesn't know where he stands anymore. And the masculine psyche cannot relax without orientation. This is when thinking turns into rumination. He imagines scenarios, rewrites moments, feels irritation without a clear target. Because you didn't leave, you became unavailable for emotional convenience. And convenience is what dulls desire. Jung would call this the activation of the shadow, the part of him that fears inadequacy, avoidance, passivity. Your withdrawal doesn't accuse him. It reveals him to himself. And that is deeply unsettling. You didn't say, "This isn't enough." Your energy said it for you. Now, every interaction carries weight. Every silence has meaning. Every message, or lack of one, is felt. He starts noticing his impulses. To check, to hover, to test the connection without committing. And the more you do not react, the more he feels exposed. Because a woman who no longer explains herself is no longer emotionally manageable. She cannot be soothed with words. She cannot be delayed with promises. She must be met or lost. And that binary is what sharpens focus. You become a psychological edge. Not loud, not dramatic, unavoidable. And this is how you remain in his thoughts. Not as longing alone, but as a question his mind cannot close. Because when a woman chooses herself without resentment, she doesn't disappear from a man's life. She becomes the standard. His nervous system remembers. At some point, his thinking about you stops being emotional and becomes structural. This is the phase most women misinterpret. He's not fantasizing. He's recalibrating. Because when you stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped filling the gaps, you didn't create distance. You created contrast between who you were and who you are now. And contrast forces comparison. As Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your withdrawal shines light on his patterns. He begins to notice something unsettling. Life feels the same, but flatter. Interactions feel easier, but emptier. Because your presence was not noise. It was texture. And now that texture is gone, he doesn't miss the conversations as much as he misses how he felt after them. Grounded, seen, oriented. You were a psychological anchor. And anchors are only noticed when they're lifted. This is when he starts mentally revisiting you during unrelated moments. While driving, while scrolling, while talking to others who don't quite reach him the same way. Not because you were dramatic, but because you were real. You didn't demand emotional performance. You didn't chase clarity. You simply stopped offering yourself where there was no mutual depth. And now, his unconscious is trying to solve a problem it didn't know existed. Why did she stop trying? And why does that bother me so much? Because effort from a woman is comforting, but self-containment is confronting. Jung would say this is the moment the psyche recognizes a lost symbol. You were not just a person. You represented coherence. And when coherence leaves, the mind searches for it. This is why he may reach out casually, lightly, as if nothing happened. Not because nothing happened, but because he's testing whether the old dynamic still exists. And your response, calm, measured, unchanged, confirms it doesn't. You are no longer emotionally accessible on autopilot. And once a man senses that, his thinking deepens. Because he realizes something irreversible. You didn't pull away to provoke him. You pulled away because you didn't need to stay. And a woman who doesn't need to stay is the one a man cannot stop thinking about. Now something subtle but decisive happens inside him. He stops asking what you're doing and starts asking who you've become. This is where emotional focus turns into fixation. Because a woman who withdraws with bitterness is predictable, but a woman who withdraws with calm clarity is destabilizing. As Carl Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. You changed, and that change reacted with him. Not loudly. Internally. He senses that you are no longer oriented around being understood. You are oriented around being aligned. And alignment is frightening to someone who benefited from imbalance. Before, he could rely on your empathy to soften his inconsistency. Now, your silence does not punish, it defines. You are no longer emotionally available to confusion. This is when his mind starts circling a single realization. She didn't leave because she was angry. She left because she was done carrying what wasn't hers. That realization cuts deeper than rejection. Because rejection attacks the ego, but self-possession confronts the soul. Jung would call this a loss of projection. He can no longer project comfort, patience, or emotional safety onto you. You reclaimed it. And once reclaimed, it cannot be borrowed again. This is why his thoughts about you become strangely respectful. Less romantic fantasy. More seriousness. He begins to measure himself against the version of you he now senses exists. Quieter. More centered. Less available. And the masculine psyche reacts to this in only two ways. Withdrawal or elevation. Either way, you remain central in his mind. Because you became a threshold. A point where something could no longer continue the same way. And thresholds are unforgettable. You are no longer the woman who waits to be chosen. You are the woman whose absence asks a question he cannot ignore. Was I enough? Or did I assume she always would be? That question does not fade. It echoes. And as long as it echoes, you remain exactly where you are now, in his emotional focus, without chasing, without explaining, without returning to who you used to be. Eventually, he realizes something that cannot be undone. You are no longer emotionally reachable from the same place. Not because you hardened, but because you integrated. This is where his thoughts about you stop circling the past and begin pressing against the present. He senses that if he were to reach you now, he would have to come differently, with clarity, with intention, with weight. And that realization creates tension. As Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Your shift removes his escape routes. Before, ambiguity worked, distance worked, half effort worked. Now none of it does. Because you are no longer reacting. You are responding only to what is real. This is when his internal dialogue becomes uncomfortable. He notices how often he assumed your patience, how easily he leaned on your understanding, how little he risked, because you carried the emotional risk for both of you. And now that weight has returned to him, not through confrontation, through absence. You didn't take anything from him. You stopped giving what he never learned to hold. Jung would say this is the beginning of individuation, not just for you, but for him as well. Your wholeness demands his. And here is the quiet truth most never hear. A man does not become attached because a woman proves her value. He becomes attached when he realizes he misjudged it. You are no longer available for emotional consumption. You are available only for resonance. And resonance cannot be forced. This is why even if he dates others, talks to others, distracts himself, you return to his mind in moments of stillness. Because stillness is where truth lives. And the truth is simple, unsettling, and precise. You didn't disappear. You outgrew the version of the dynamic that required you to stay small. And once a man senses that a woman has chosen herself without hostility, without drama, without revenge, she becomes a psychological landmark, not a memory, a measure. And every connection he touches afterward is unconsciously compared to the one he lost access to. Not because she left, but because she no longer needed to stay. And that awareness keeps you exactly where you are now, in his mind, without effort, without words, without return. At this stage, his thinking about you is no longer reactive. It becomes existential. You are no longer a person he misses. You are a turning point he cannot rewrite. Because something fundamental has shifted. He understands that returning to you would require change, not nostalgia. And that realization is heavy. As Carl Jung said, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Your absence removes his substitutes. He can no longer soothe himself with the idea that you'll always be there. He can no longer postpone growth by leaning on your patience. He can no longer believe that things would simply reset. Because you didn't close the door angrily. You outgrew the room. And outgrowing is irreversible. This is when his mind starts to revisit not what he felt, but what he failed to become. He senses that you now require presence, not potential. Consistency, not chemistry. Action, not intention. And whether he reaches out or stays silent, the pressure remains. Because a woman who chooses herself becomes a psychological standard, not something to win, something to rise to. Jung would describe this as a confrontation with the self. The moment when the ego realizes it cannot bargain its way forward. You are no longer an option he can approach casually. You are a threshold he must cross consciously, or walk away from honestly. And that clarity is terrifying to someone who relied on ambiguity. So his thoughts linger, not because he is confused, but because he is cornered by truth. Truth that says, she didn't demand more. She became more. And becoming more without announcing it is the most powerful emotional disruption there is. You didn't ask him to change. You changed your availability. And that shift, quiet, dignified, irreversible, is what keeps replaying in his mind. Because when a woman stops negotiating her worth, she doesn't haunt a man emotionally. She awakens him, or leaves him behind. And either way, she is never forgotten. There comes a quiet realization in him, not sudden, not dramatic, but final. He understands that you are no longer emotionally available by default. And this is where his thinking becomes irreversible. Because before, even when things were uncertain, he subconsciously believed you would adapt. Wait, explain, hold space longer than you should. Now he senses something different. You are not guarding yourself. You are rooted. As Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And something in him recognizes that you are doing exactly that. You no longer revolve around whether he understands you. You revolve around inner alignment. And that is devastating to a dynamic built on imbalance. This is the moment he realizes. Reaching out casually would feel disrespectful. Breadcrumbs would fall flat. Ambiguity would expose him. Because your energy no longer rewards half-presence. He starts to feel the cost of inaction. Not externally, internally. He senses that time has passed in a way it cannot pass back. You are no longer the woman who hopes. You are the woman who knows. And knowing changes posture, tone, rhythm, everything. Jung would say this is when projection collapses fully. You are no longer a fantasy he interacts with. You are a reality that requires maturity. And here is the truth few women hear. A man does not regret losing access to affection. He regrets losing access to a woman who would have grown with him, had he met her where she stood. That regret does not shout. It settles. It shows up late at night, in quiet moments, in comparisons he never meant to make. Because now, every time he encounters ease without depth, chemistry without grounding, attention without substance, your absence becomes loud again. Not because you left, but because you evolved. And once a man realizes a woman has crossed a psychological threshold without him, she becomes part of his internal landscape, not a story he can revise, a lesson he carries. And that lesson keeps him thinking, long after silence replaces contact, long after ego replaces hope, long after he understands that you didn't walk away to be remembered, you walked away to become yourself. And now everything settles, not because the story ended, but because you returned to yourself. This is the point where his thoughts about you stop seeking resolution. They accept reality. He understands, finally, that you are no longer a woman he can approach from habit. You are someone who requires presence, depth, and truth, or nothing at all. And that understanding changes how he holds you inside his mind. As Carl Jung said, what you become aware of sets you free. What you remain unaware of continues to bind you. You became aware. He was forced to follow or remain bound. You no longer ask why he thinks about you. You feel no need to confirm it. Because the real transformation never happened in him. It happened in you. You stopped negotiating with uncertainty. You stopped shrinking for connection. You stopped explaining your worth. And in doing so, you reclaimed your center. This is why he cannot forget you. Not because you were perfect, but because you were integrated. A woman who is integrated does not linger as longing. She lingers as truth. He senses that whatever connection comes next in his life will require more of him than before. Because once a man encounters a woman who chooses herself without hostility, without manipulation, without fear, his internal standards change. Even if he never speaks your name again, you live quietly in his psyche, as the moment comfort stopped being enough. And you are no longer waiting to be remembered. You are moving forward with a calm that does not need witnesses, a presence that does not chase, a power that does not explain itself. This is the final shift. Not him thinking about you, but you no longer thinking about whether he does. And that is where your freedom begins.